Hello, and welcome to the newest installment of our PowerTips Live. My name is Ellie Byrne. I am a marketing specialist at Legrand, and I'm joined here by our host, Duncan Gwynn, our Senior Data Center Solutions Field Engineer at Legrand. Today's technical webinar, we will be discussing TLS security certificates, generating self-signed certificates and certificate signing requests, installing certificate authority or wildcard certificates, and bulk deployment of security certificate methods. Feel free to post any of your questions that you have in the Q&A section or the chat sections throughout this presentation, or you can wait to the end when we open it up to questions. And if you have any pressing issues that are not relating to the topics of today, you can reach out to the tech support team at tech@raritan.com. And with that, I will pass the floor to Duncan to begin.
Thank you, Ellie. So as Ellie mentioned, we are discussing how to manage TLS certificates on intelligent PDUs. We're focusing on the Xeris platform products today, which would include, Raritan PX2, PX3, as well as our new PX4 generation PDUs. And it also includes our server technology brand Pro3X and Pro4X. So our agenda for today, I'll do a quick TLS certificate overview. I promise not to PowerPoint you to death. And then we'll do a live demonstration of how to install certificates in the web interface. And then we'll cover some bulk deployment options as well. We'll have a conclusion, and then we'll open it up for Q&A, as Ellie mentioned. So let's move along. What is TLS? So I know we have a variety of people in our audience today. Some are going to be far more experienced with TLS than I am, and some, may be new to the technology and just looking to get rid of that nagging certificate error message that pops up on a new PDU. So TLS stands for Transport Layer Security, and it is a cryptographic protocol that provides us with end-to-end security on our network sessions when we're logging into the PDU. And it's protecting our information through an encrypted channel that can only be decrypted by the intended recipient. In this case, that would be your Xeris platform product. So why do we need TLS certificates? TLS will function without a certificate. We can see that TLS is working even when we do not trust the certificate, but TLS certificates are the basis for secure web browsing. So they help us to ensure that we're communicating with a trusted server that's been verified by a certificate authority, or what we call a CA. And those certificate authorities are typically well-known root certificate authorities that are in a repository on the web browser. They include companies like DigiCert, GlobalSign. Google has its own trust services. There's many. And the certificate that we'll be working with today is actually signed by GoDaddy Root Certificate Authority. So let's look at the structure of what that certificate path looks like. So if we look at the bottom of our path, that's going to be our actual device TLS certificate. And we're using what's referred to as a wildcard certificate. So the star at the beginning of the domain name there will allow us to secure multiple subdomains with the same certificate, as long as it's within that demo.raritan.com space. So I will be using mypx4.demo.raritan.com as my host name for my PDU, and that will fit within that wildcard and therefore be, acceptable and trusted. Directly above that, we have our intermediate or issuing CA, this certificate authority that has actually signed our wildcard certificate. And then above that, we have what is the root CA. So at the very top, there's nothing above that. It is the root. So that's going to be what we would see trusted in our web browser. And when you log into a PDU for the first time, you're going to get error messages because we have a generic demo certificate installed on the PDU that's not signed by a trusted root certificate authority, and therefore your browser will give you an error. We're going to look at what some of those errors look like and what the potential causes for those errors would be. The first would be common name invalid. This one is a pretty frequent error when accessing a web server via like its IP address instead of its host name. So in my case, if I was not using the demo.raritan.com host name, and I'm using the 172 IP address here, it's going to flag me because the common name does not match what I have on the certificate. Now, there are fields on the certificate known as subject alternative names where you could populate an IP address, so this error wouldn't be present. But since this is a wildcard certificate, the SAN's not specified, and depending on the security policy of your organization, they may not permit using IP addresses in the SAN field at all. And that will vary, of course, by organization to organization. Another popular error message would be certificate authority invalid. So this is generally what you'll see with a PDU that's at the factory default setting with the generic certificate installed. And it's simply indicating that the certificate authority that has signed the certificate is not trusted by the browser. It's not in the root store. And this is going to, of course, give you this error message. Another possible cause for this error would be if you sign the certificate with an external certificate authority, such as a local enterprise CA, and you don't have that certificate in your root store, you're also going to get this error message. Another one that we see often is the cert date invalid, and this one could be caused by expired certificate. If you have let your certificate lapse and it's past its expiration date, you'll see this message. Or if it's not yet valid, if you've created a certificate and the not valid before date has not yet come, you will see this error message. Another potential area where this may pop up is if you have generated a self-signed certificate or a certificate signing request on the PDU, and you do not have the date and time set correctly on the PDU, it's going to generate that certificate with a time frame that is totally not what it should be. It might be the year 2000 or something way in the past, and therefore it's expired when you install it. Depending on your organization security policy, you may or may not be able to bypass this. So typically we can click the advanced button and we can proceed past this error message. It's of course going to warn us that it's not safe. But if we're setting up a PDU for the first time, we can get into it. But if your security policy does not allow that, you may be stuck here and you will not have access to the web interface, which would be problematic. So we're going to jump into the live demo, and I'm going to pull up my web browser here. And I have the login screen, well, not the login screen, but the error message that I would see on a factory default PDU. So you can see, as we mentioned, we see this cert authority invalid message. Now, if I hit the F12 key, I'm using Google Chrome. So F12 will bring up my developer tools. Within the developer tools, I have a security tab, and that will give me information regarding the TLS certificate as well as the TLS protocol that I'm connected with. So we can see that I'm using TLS 1.3 here, but we can see we have some issues. We have this cert authority invalid message because it's missing a valid trusted certificate, and we have another error with it incorrectly. Now that's not the pressing issue. It's more so that we are we don't have a valid cert authority. To compare that to a popular website, we'll look at Google and look at the same security tab. And we can see here that this one is trusted, and similar connection here with TLS version and our ciphers. Now, if I view the certificate of Google, we can see issued to the common name. It's also using a wildcard. It's issued by WR2, which would be the issuing CA, intermediate CA. And we can view the full certificate path under the details tab. So much like what I showed in my slideshow, we have the web server TLS certificate at the bottom. Then we have the issuing intermediate CA directly above it, and we have the root CA at the top. We can click on each one of these and gain details about its validity period, like the root CA, not valid before 2016, not valid after 2036. So it's a 20-year validity period for the root. For the intermediate, we're looking at 2023 to 2029, which, approximately 6 years there. And then the web server TLS certificate, you can see it's not valid before May 6th of 2024, so pretty recent. And it's not valid after July 29th, 2024. So this is a pretty short period. Now, the maximum validity period currently permissible is 13 months, approximately 397 days. And one of the reasons we wanted to discuss this topic is because Google, via the Chromium project, has proposed a 90-day certificate validity period, which is kind of what we see reflected here. And the reason for this proposal, you can look up the proposal on the Chromium project, but one of their main points was we need to reduce the validity period to increase security and promote automation in deploying certificates to our web servers and reduce human error essentially. The certificate generation and deployment process has been error prone in many ways, and they're basically wanting to create a more automated approach that would eliminate some of that. And that's why we wanted to start with this topic with our new series on PowerTips Live here. So I'm going to close out of this. We'll go back. Oh, one more thing that I wanted to show you before we go directly into the PDU web interface. If you wanted to view your web browser certificate repository in Chrome, you can navigate to Chrome://system, and then you'll see the Chrome root store. You can expand that, and you can see all of the trusted root certificates that are available here. So, we were using GoDaddy, which is somewhere in this long list of certificates. There we go. So there is our GoDaddy root certificate authority G2, and that's what has signed our wildcard certificate that we will be using today. So just a little tip for you if you wanted to see what was available there. Close out of the developer tools, and I am allowed to bypass this and proceed to my PDU login page. And again, this is at factory defaults. This is a PX4 PDU that I'm logging into. So the default password is going to be Legrand. And then it's going to force me to change a password. I'm just going to change it to Raritan for demo sake. Now that I'm logged into my PDU web interface, I'm going to navigate on the left-hand side to device settings, and then the security submenu. And then lastly, the TLS certificate page. So this interface will show us the current certificate that's installed and all the details associated with it. We can see it's pretty much blank. Demo certificate's our common name. The issuer is generic demo CA. Some details on the validity period and the key type and key length. And then down below, we have the option to create a new TLS certificate or CSR, certificate signing request. So we could populate these details, our country code in, to our office location here. And the common name would be the host name of my PDU. So mypx4.demo.raritan.com is what I have specified currently. Put in a contact email for the administrator. And then for the subject alternative names, we can specify in our interface here up to 10 subject alternative names. And this might be different host names that we have configured for the PDU, or maybe IP addresses if we allow that. So I'm going to put my IP address here. I can add a name, and I could put just my PX4 as an alternative host name. And then I can specify different key types. So we have the option to choose an RSA key or an elliptic curve key. I'll leave it at RSA for the demo, but we do have the option to select different key lengths, 2048 versus 3072. For time, I'm going to select 2048. And then to create the CSR, we would specify, a challenge passphrase, and then create that CSR. And what this will do will, generate a TLS key for us and generate a certificate signing request file that we can export from the PDU and take to our certificate authority that may be, like an internal Windows-based certificate authority, or maybe you have some other third-party tool that you're using to sign certificates. Generally, organizations that I work with will have some policy that they follow for that. So I'm sure that you're aware of that. But you would download the CSR and have that signed by your CA. We're not going to cover that in our demo because the CA signing process will vary widely depending on what your CA is and how your organization process is followed. But I just wanted to show you how you can create that CSR. You can also download the private key. Now, one of the advantages of creating the CSR directly on the PDU is that the private key is there already and you don't have to move it around. Kind of the age-old problem with cryptography is, key distribution. So if you don't have to move your private key around, the better off you are. So if you were maybe signing a certificate that was going to be uploaded to multiple PDUs, then you would need, of course, the key at that point. In our case, I'm just going to delete the certificate sign request because I'm going to use those same details and show you how you would do a self-signed certificate. So everything that I populated previously is already here. All I need to do differently is check the self-sign box, and then I would specify a validity period and number of days. So that it defaults to 100 days. If I wanted to go at the maximum allowed for, web browsers. Now, self-signed certificates, I believe, have different rules, but we'll specify 397, and it would be the same process. I just click that button. It goes through that key generation again. After this is done, though, we'll have some different options available to us to install the key and certificate rather than download a certificate signing request. And that would, of course, complete our self-signed certificate installation process. And I can also download the key and certificate separately if I wanted to store those somewhere else or upload them to a different PDU. Now, I mentioned we're going to be working with a wildcard certificate, so I'm just going to delete this altogether. And I'm going to instead check this box down here that will allow me to upload my own CA signed certificate and key file. So I'll start with the key file. And you can see here that I have a key.pem and a cert.pem. So I'll select my key. And then I will select my cert file. After those have shown up here, I don't know why it's taken so long, but I will click upload. And it's not installed yet. So I've uploaded the certificate and the key, and you can see that everything's good. Otherwise, I would get an error message saying that the key and certificate didn't match. But we can see the details of the certificate. So I have, star.demo.raritan.com as my common name. And I can see the issuer details over here. So GoDaddy.com, Arizona Scottsdale, etc. And now I can install this key and certificate to complete the process. So it is a best practice to validate the certificate before you install it. It tells me here that they've been installed. The page is going to reload automatically in 10 seconds. We can see after it reloads that it still says my session's not secure. So I actually need to close out of this session and create a new session before it recognizes that certificate. So mypx4.demo.raritan.com. And now I don't see the not secure message. Now I don't see the lock. Google in one of the recent versions of Chrome took away the lock icon, but I can click on what they call the tune icon and see that my connection's secure. I can get additional details here and check that my certificate's valid, and we can see that I have the wildcard certificate installed now. So that's it. That is the certificate installation process, utilizing the web interface. And I mentioned we're going to cover some bulk deployment options. Now, you may not be able to log into every PDU in your environment and upload a certificate manually. That would be a very long, laborious process and would be a big project for someone on your team. So we do have a couple of options for bulk deployment, one of which is utilizing our USB stick method. So in a separate PowerTips live video a couple of years ago, we covered, some, bulk configuration and firmware upgrades via the USB stick. So you can go back and reference that on our PowerTips live landing page. But I did want to touch on how we can utilize the USB stick to install certificates. So we have two approaches. We have the wildcard certificate, which I just showed you in the web interface. And what that would look like is we have 3 files that we're going to put on the root folder of a FAT32 formatted USB. We have our cert and our key. Those are the obvious ones. And then the fwupdate.cfg is what we refer to as our control file. So it's the file that the PDU reads when you plug in a USB stick. It's what gives the instructions on what to do and ensures that whatever user is plugging in that USB stick is authenticated to do what they want to do. So if we open this up with Notepad, we can see a handful of lines here. So the first set of lines are going to be authentication. So we have user credentials. So users admin, password Legrand. Now you'll see that I have a second set of credentials. So if you're on firmware version 3.5.0 or higher, you can actually specify multiple lines of credentials to kind of iterate through if you have multiple passwords. Now, in a typical scenario where you're using one of these default passwords, you're going to have to change it. I've left that line out of this just for demonstration purposes, but you would add a set underscore password equals and then your new password. So these files are kind of assuming that you've already done some initial configuration and your PDUs on the network. You would just change these lines to match your current administrator password. The log file equals log.txt line is a line that will create a text log file on our USB stick of what occurs when you plug that USB stick in. It will show that there's either a authentication success or failure, and it will log any other errors that occur, if any errors occur, during that process. It'll essentially be the same thing that's displayed on the PDU LCD on the controller. The next 2 lines are, kind of the magic ones here. So we have the cert file, TLS cert file equals cert.pem, TLS key file equals key.pem. And we're just going to specify, the cert and the key that we've loaded onto the USB stick. So since this is a wildcard, we're just using a wildcard certificate and its key, and we can install that on multiple PDUs. Now, your organization may not support you using wildcard certificates on your PDU, depending on what your policy is. Now, in that case, you would utilize our device-specific method, and you'll see very similar. I have 3 files. Now, if you had more than one PDU, you would, of course, have more key and cert files. In this case, I'm just using one serial number. But if we look at this fwupdate.cfg file, everything's the same with the exception of the cert and key file lines, where I have a placeholder for the serial number of my PDU. So we'll go through the process, we'll authenticate, make sure the user has permissions to do what they're doing, and then we will replace this placeholder with the serial number of the PDU that we plugged the USB stick into. So in my case, it's going to be this RHN serial number here. It's going to look for that file name and identify it and use that. So you can have a bunch of certs and keys on a USB stick and just go around and plug that in, and it will load the appropriate certificate for that serial number. And depending on how you generate your certificates, maybe you have some automated method where you could go ahead and specify that file name and kind of generate everything seamlessly. So that is the USB stick option, and I'm not going to cover, I'm not actually going to demo that because I don't have a camera pointing at a PDU controller right now. But if you have any questions on that, you can reach out to us for details, and we'll help you work through that. Now, if you are looking for a method that you can do remotely that is still automated, we do have a JSON RPC API for the Xeris platform products. And part of that API, we have a Python library. So I've taken an example that we have on the web in our documentation. I've kind of taken that and put it into a functional script that you can specify arguments that I'll I'll demonstrate here. But on our web page in our JSON RPC documentation for the Python client bindings, we have certificate upload and installation. And you can see that we can upload a certificate file. Key file is optional. So if you've already generated a CSR and the key is already there, you can just upload the signed certificate and be done. We have some response codes that we would receive depending on if we have success or failure. And then the actual example, the code block here, shows how we can achieve this in Python. So I have put this together, and I've used just an argument parser to take some arguments like username, password, IP address, some basic things, and then I put that example in here. So I won't go through the details of the script. You can touch base with tech support if you have any questions, but we're just going to upload the certificate. We're going to translate the return code that we receive into a text message that we can interpret easy. And then we will view the pending certificate that we've uploaded. Now, the best practice, as previously mentioned, and what's mentioned in our documentation, would be to validate the pending certificate before you do the install. So, you don't want to accidentally install the wrong certificate for the wrong host. So, you could implement some kind of conditional statement here that would validate, the IP address or, common name versus the what's on the certificate, etc. So the script is kept at a very high level just to demonstrate that it's possible to script the certificate upload process. So what I'll do here is open my folder back up, and I'm just going to open a command prompt here in this folder. And then if I specify Python, my script name is upload_cert.py. IP address of my PDU, username admin, password Raritan, cert file is going to be cert.pem, and the key file is going to be key.pem. I can run that, and it happened pretty quickly, but we can see that the upload was successful. This is the return code that we received. We can see that it printed out our pending certificate details. So I just use the same wildcard certificate, so there's really nothing new here. And then after the installation, it prints the active certificate. So again, you would validate that you're installing the correct certificate, before you do the install. And then you can also validate that the active certificate's correct after the fact if you wanted to automate that more. But that concludes our demo. We're going to go ahead and open it up for a Q&A. I know that we received one question ahead of time. So let me pull this back up. The question that we received was, what versions of TLS are supported and what are the features of each? So that's a great question. The supported versions of TLS are going to vary depending on your firmware version. But as of our latest release of 4.2.0, we support TLS version 1.2 and TLS version 1.3. Firmware version 3.5, which was released like 5 years ago in 2019 now, that was the version that disabled version 1.0 and version 1.1 and enabled the support of TLS version 1.3. So if you're on 3.5 or higher, you're using TLS 1.2 or 1.3. And the TLS handshake process between the TLS versions is going to vary. TLS 1.2 and 1.3 have slightly different handshake process. That's outside the scope of the webinar, but they are slightly different. But we're always going to prioritize the highest supported level of security between the client machine and the web server, which in this case is the PDU. And if a version in Cypher cannot be agreed upon in that handshake process, it's going to fail and the connection is not going to be possible. So hopefully that answered that question. We support TLS version 1.2 and 1.3 as of our latest firmware. So Ellie, I will turn it over to you if we have any other questions that have come up throughout the presentation, and we can address those or do our best to address those.
Thank you, Duncan. Yeah, so we had one come through in our chat, and that would be, is this video going to be available to download or the recording? So this video will be available on our PowerTips Live landing page shortly after this concludes. So you will be able to find that there. We also had a question come through in the Q&A. Joseph asked any plans to add any IPA client, and would that allow for automatic setup of time servers, IDAP authentication, getting local certificate authority, doing cert requests, renewals, with a cert monger, at least with free IPA/Red Hat IDM. That was the first part. If you can address that, Duncan.
So I'm not aware of any plans to add such a client. You know, I can't answer that accurately right now. That's something we could certainly look into, and we could touch base with Joseph outside of the webinar to maybe get some more details on that and answer that in a more full way. But as of right now, I'm not aware of any plans to do that. But I'm on the tech support team, so maybe our PM team and engineering team have some plans that I'm not aware of right now.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, I will also allow access for microphone for our attendees. So if you'd like to come off of mute and ask any questions directly to Duncan, you're more than welcome to do so. Are there any questions we can answer right now?
I saw one just pop up. What are the common mistakes when we try to install TLS certificates? So, you know, common mistakes would be, you know, maybe entering details in the TLS certificate fields incorrectly, or maybe, you know, missing subject alternative names, things of that nature. I mentioned one common one that we see is when the date and time is not set on the PDU. If you do a self-signed or a cert signing request without the date and time set, then you're going to generate a certificate that has a validity period that's in the past, essentially, because the date and time is going to be, you know, some arbitrary date and time, you know, back in the year 2000 or something. So those are the most common ones. More of a common user error that we see is, you know, the certificate gets installed into the web server, the PDU, and then users continue to access the PDU via the IP address. And they'll still get the certificate error and, you know, wonder, hey, I installed the certificate, why is it not working? So an example of that would be if I just go to the IP address of my PDU here, it's not trusted. So the common name is invalid. We see that error message. Now, if I look at the certificate, I see that it's still the wildcard certificate, and it's only going to be valid if I access it via the appropriate common name or a subject alternative name that's specified on the certificate. Now, this certificate doesn't have a subject alternative name. That's my IP address, so I have to access it via the host name that I have specified here. So those would be the most common errors that we you know, see on a, I don't want to say on a daily basis, but, you know, maybe weekly, monthly, with users. Anyone else? I'll take that as a no. Ellie, if we want to wrap it up,
Of
you know,
course.
we can, of course, take any questions. I have our contact information on our slide here. Hopefully that was up for long enough for you guys to gather that, but you can reach out to us, you know, via phone, using the number listed there, of course, via email. You can log a ticket on raritan.com/support. I also have the contact information for server technology up as well, because again, this does apply to Xeris platform products that include server technology, Pro 3X and Pro 4X PDUs. And I thought that I saw a hand raise. in the audience if there's another question. It looks like it's gone now though, so maybe I answered it. I don't know.
Awesome. Thank you, Duncan. So thank you all for joining. Again, as Duncan mentioned, all the contact information is here. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any other questions or need to talk anything through in more detail. Again, the recording will be available on our PowerTips live landing page. Right now is raritan.com/landing/PowerTipsLive. And that will be up soon if you need to access this recording. And that is all. Thank you all for joining again.